You have a nice time on your week off?
Thank God. Yes, we did. Thank you for asking. Melo, did you have a nice time in the week off?
Yep.
Good. Good morning, Joan and Susie.
Good morning, Rabbi. How are you?
Thank the good Lord. Doing well. Okay, let's jump right in. Okay. Says the Mishnah. Whoops, I didn't do share screen. I just changed my screen. Let me try this again. Share. There we go. Okay, now this we can go through rather quickly because we've already sorry. We have already discussed this Mishnah once or twice, so it should be fairly simple. Says the Mishnah, continuing the earlier discussion of the halachas of immersion for Torah study and prayer for one who experienced the seminal emission. The Mishnah discusses a case where individuals who were already impure with a severe form of ritual impurity are exposed also to the impurity of a seminal emission. They are required to immerse themselves. Oops. There we go. Even though they remain impure, they are required to immerse themselves and purify themselves of the impurity from the seminal emission, even though they remain impure due to the more severe impurity. Consequently, even a Zav, we're going to learn more about what is a Zav later, whose impurity lasts at least 7 days, who experienced the seminal emission, for which, were he not a Zav, he would be impure only for 1 day. Or, for example, a menstruating woman who discharged semen. How is that possible?
We all know how it's possible. Let's continue.
Despite the fact that she is already impure with a severe impurity unaffected by her immersion, and a woman who engaged in relations with her husband, which means that first she had relations and later saw menstrual blood, all require immersion. So even though she would be considered impure. Again, impure does not mean dirty. Impure does not mean bad. Impure means impure, and whatever the Jewish laws have to do with impurity. So that would be 7 days. Or the Zav is a male, would be 7 days. So even though they're impure for 7 days, and now they have a lesser impurity, they still have to immerse to quote unquote rid themselves of that lesser impurity, even though they still remain impure. And Rabbi Yehuda exempts them from immersion. He says, what's the point? Why do they go to mikveh? Anyways, they're impure. They're impure anyway, so let them not have to go to mikveh until the end. Says the Gemara, a dilemma was raised before the students of the yeshiva, one who experienced the seminal emission and was therefore required to immerse himself. So first he has the lighter form of impurity, who later saw a discharge and now has a more severe form of impurity because that discharge rendered him a Zav. So according to Rabbi Yehuda who said that that you don't have to immerse to get yourself rid of the lighter form of impurity, if anyways you will remain impure. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, what's this legal status? Where the less severe form of impurity comes before the more severe form of impurity, does this person have to go to the mikvah? So the Gemara explains the size of the dilemma. When in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda exempted the Zav who saw the seminal emission from immersion, that was because from the outset he was not fit for immersion, as the immersion would not be effective in purifying him from the impurity of the Zav. However, one who experienced the seminal emission who later saw a discharge that rendered him a Zav, so when he saw the seminal emission, he was fit for immersion to be pure that day, and only later became impure with the severe impurity of a Zav. Would Rabbi Yehuda require immersion? Or perhaps there's no difference and he's exempt from immersion in both cases. In order to resolve this dilemma, come in here the last case of our Mishnah. If there was a woman who engaged in relations with her husband and later saw blood, she requires immersion. And Rabbi Yehuda exempts her from the immersion. Isn't the woman who engaged in relations with her husband and later saw blood like one who experienced the seminal emission who later saw a discharge that made him a zav? As in both cases, there is a less severe ritual impurity, which would only last 1 day, followed by a more severe impurity that lasts 7. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda exempts. Conclude from this that Rabbi Yehuda does not distinguish between the cases. Doesn't matter which one came first. Indeed, Rabbi Chia explicitly taught one who experienced the seminal emission who later saw a discharge that renders him a zav requires immersion, and Rabbi Yehuda exempts. May we return to thee, he who's dead.
So what is a zav?
So a zav is someone who sees a man who sees an unregular flow from where, so I guess it would be
And a
like a
flow?
seminal emission, but it would just be basically like sperm dripping from that
You mean
area.
he's a woman? He's having.
No, if a man is a man and he has semen dripping from that area, it's a kind of an illness
Hmm?
where involuntarily semen is coming out. So he's having a discharge and it's not supposed to be there.
Okay. All right.
We're gonna learn more details on that later. Okay, does anybody want to explain to us what does it mean when we return to thee, he who's dead?
That he that he is that he is dead.
Okay, so here's another big rule about the Talmud. We refer to chapters not by chapters, but by the first words of the chapter. So because the first words of the first Mishnah that began this chapter that we just finished was he who's dead is lying before him, and he is exempt from tefillin and from saying Shema, etc., etc. So that is how we refer to the chapter. There are only, I believe, 2 chapters, or 2 sets of chapters, I should say, in the entire Talmud that begin the same way. So those 2 have a special way how they're differentiated. But in general, if you say chapter he who's dead, or in Hebrew, the chapter Misha Mesu, that would be a landmark that no matter who you're talking to, if they've learned this, they'll know which chapter you're talking about, and which tractate you're in. So at the end of the chapter, we don't want to just say goodbye to the chapter because Torah, we always go back to learn more and to learn again and with deeper insight. So we offer a short prayer when we finish a chapter. May we return to you, he who's dead. Well done, everyone. We have finished another chapter. Next chapter, I believe this is chapter 3. Mishnah. New concept, new Mishnah. Let's get ready. L'chaim, we're gonna have to start thinking again. Are you guys ready for that?
Yeah.
Good. This Mishnah determines the time beyond which the different prayers may not be recited. In other words, every prayer has its time. The morning prayer has to be in the morning. The afternoon prayer has to be in the afternoon, and the evening prayer has to be in the evening. So when is the morning? When is the afternoon? When is the evening? Let's go. Mishnah. This Mishnah determines the time beyond which the different prayers may not be recited. According to the rabbis, the morning prayer may be recited until noon. Right? That makes sense, right? It's morning until it's noon. And when it's noon, it's not morning anymore. Rabbi Yehuda said it may be recited only until 4 hours after sunrise. Okay.
You're
According to,
freezing.
sorry,
Can you hear,
I hear you.
Rabbi?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Do you hear me? Jordan and Susie, do you hear us? Do you hear me? Hello? Anyone hear me? Oh, do you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, we can
Okay,
hear
yeah,
you.
you're back. I
Okay.
wasn't sure if it was you or me.
I hope it wasn't me because we finally got this internet working. Okay. So, according to the rabbis, the afternoon prayer may be recited until the evening. That makes sense, right? From afternoon until evening. Rabbi Yehuda said it may be recited only until the middle of the afternoon. Only until I just muted that for the back feed. If you have any questions, please unmute and ask. What's the midpoint in the afternoon? So it's halfway through the afternoon. Which is the midpoint of the period that begins with the sacrifice of the daily afternoon offering and ends at nightfall, which is the end of the afternoon. So we calculate from a half hour after midday until sunset or nightfall, and then we cut that in half, and that halfway point is when you may no longer begin saying the afternoon prayers. The evening prayer may be recited throughout the night and is not fixed to a specific hours. Okay. Now we have an additional prayer. For example, on Shabbos, we have an additional prayer. On Yom Kippur, we have an additional prayer. Rosh Hashanah, on all the holidays. On no, not on Hanukkah. On all the major holidays, we have an additional prayer, and on Shabbos, and on Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, we have a yeah. So, according to the rabbis, the additional prayer may be recited all day. And Rabbi Yehuda said only until 7 hours after sunrise. So that's the basic foundation, the basic framework. The morning is either until noon or until 4 hours. The afternoon is either the entire afternoon from midday or half hour after midday until nightfall, or until the midpoint of nightfall, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And the evening prayer, everyone agrees, can be said all night until the morning. And the additional prayer, according to the rabbis, is all day, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only until 7 hours after sunrise, which would be 1 hour after midday. Okay. Says the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah that the morning prayer may be recited only until a few hours into the day. The Gemara raises a contradiction based on what we learned already. We learned that the mitzvah is to recite the morning Shema at sunrise, so that it will juxtapose redemption, which is mentioned in the blessings following the Shema, to the Amidah prayer. Remember, we discussed this at length a few months ago, which is recited immediately after sunrise, and then he will pray during the daytime. So when is the right time to say Shema? Do you have 4 hours or half of the day? Or, sorry, not Shema, the Amidah prayer. Does it have to be recited immediately after sunrise, or do you have 4 or 6 hours to recite the morning prayer? So what do we do? Does anyone remember if that was everyone or just some people? Or just some people who would pray like that? I think we quoted this recently The Gemara responds, this brisa does not establish a binding halacha. Rather, it taught that rule specifically with regard to those who are scrupulous in performing of the mitzvahs. As Rabbi Yochanan said, Vasikin would finish reciting the morning Shema with sunrise. But those who are not Vasikin may recite their prayers later. In other words, the best way to do it is to say your morning prayer at sunrise. But that doesn't mean that's the only time to do it. You can say your morning prayers all the way until at least 4 or hours or halfway through the day. Now the Gemara asks a question, does everyone hold that one may recite the morning prayer only until noon and no later? Didn't Rav Mari, the son of Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, say that Rabbi Yochanan said, one who erred and did not recite the evening prayer, prays in the morning prayer 2 Amida prayers. So if you didn't say your evening prayers, you can do twice in the morning to make up for it. And one who erred.
Excuse me. Does
Yeah.
that mean you say the evening prayer in the morning?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a very good question, and it might sound funny, but we're going to see soon. I think we'll be able to get there today. What prayer do you pray? So this is, again, not the entire evening prayer, just the Amida, the standing prayer, the crux of the prayers. So one who did not recite the evening prayer prays in the morning twice, and one who erred and did not recite the morning prayer prays in the afternoon prayer 2 Amida prayers. So apparently the morning prayer may be recited until the evening, at least in the event that he forgot to recite it in the morning. So here you have a guy who didn't pray in the morning, and now he's praying in the afternoon, once for the morning and once for the afternoon. So he's saying his morning prayers in the afternoon. The Gemara answers, indeed, one may continue praying for the entire day. However, if he prayed until noon, then he gets a reward for reciting prayer at its appointed time. If he prayed from there on after noon, the reward for reciting prayer he gets, but they do not give him a reward for reciting prayer at its appointed time. In other words, there's two things here. One is prayer, and the other is praying at the right time. So if you pray after noon, so you still get the reward for prayer, but not for praying in the correct time. So now that's going to lead us into a discussion. What happens if you forgot to pray and you want to compensate the prayer that you missed? In the bold, a dilemma was raised before them in the study hall. One who erred and did not recite the afternoon prayer, what is the ruling? May he recite in the evening two prayer, in the evening prayer, 2 Amida prayers? Does anyone want to explain to me why the evening making up for the afternoon would be different than the afternoon making up the morning? In other words, we said clearly that if you forgot evening prayers, you can say a second morning prayer. And it said clearly that if you forget the morning prayer, you can make a second afternoon prayer. So why are they asking that what happens if you forgot the afternoon prayer? Are you allowed to make twice the evening prayer? Why would that be different?
That's assuming you made the morning prayer.
Let's say he did his morning prayers and he forgot his afternoon prayers. Why would you think that he cannot make up for it by praying the evening prayers twice?
I got nothing.
John and Susie want to pipe in? Any ideas? Okay, let's say it's Shabbos afternoon. Right? You had a good kiddush, you had a nice cholent, it's the afternoon, you fell asleep. You didn't pray the afternoon prayers. You wake up, it's already nightfall. Is it still Shabbos?
No.
No, it's not Shabbos anymore. Which means that it's not the same day anymore, right? So are you able to make up yesterday's prayers? In the same day, fine. So I'm catching up today's prayers from an earlier prayer. But what about in the evening where I'm making up from yesterday's prayers? So let's see how the Gemara articulates this. If you say that one who erred and did not pray the evening prayer prays the morning prayer to Amidas, perhaps that's because the evening and the morning are both part of one day. As it is written, and there was evening and there was morning one day. The evening and the following morning constitute a single unit. But here, in the case under discussion, perhaps we say that prayer is in the place of sacrifice. In other words, in the olden days, we had a temple where we could sacrifice, and bring sacrifices. Today, we don't have that, and because we don't have that, we pray instead. Now, in the case of a sacrifice, we say that once the day passed, the sacrifice is invalid, and there's no way to compensate for the missed opportunity. The same should be true for prayer. Or maybe we say that since prayer at the end of the day, it's not a sacrifice, it's a prayer, it's a supplication, and any time that one wishes, he may continue to pray, and therefore I can make up for yesterday's prayers as well. So let's hear a brisa. Come and hear a resolution to this dilemma from that which Rav Huna bar Yehuda said, that Rav Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. One who erred and did not recite the afternoon prayer prays in the evening two Amida prayers, and there is no element of its day past, its sacrifice is invalid. That only applies to sacrifices, but the prayers you could pray twice in the evening and make up for yesterday's afternoon prayer. But now we have a different question. We're going to get to that other question soon. With regard to the possibility to compensate for a prayer that he failed to recite at its appointed time, the Gemara raises an objection based on that which was taught in the Brisa. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes, that which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. What does that mean? Is as follows. That which is crooked cannot be made straight refers to one who omitted the evening Shema and the morning Shema, or the evening prayer and the morning prayer. And that which is wanting cannot be numbered refers to one whose friends reached the consensus to perform a mitzvah, and he was not part of their consensus. And consequently, he missed his opportunity to join them in performance of the mitzvah. So this brisa clearly states that there's no way to compensate for a missed prayer. So to resolve this difficulty, Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, what are we dealing with here? If you look very carefully, when we look in the previous one, I'm going to highlight here on the board, one who omitted the evening Shema, that cannot be made straight. And if we look at the first one where he said you could, it said one who erred and did not recite the afternoon prayer. So the answer is very simple. Did you do it on purpose, or did something happen and you were not able to do it? So what are we dealing here in this brisa where you said you're not allowed and you have no remedy, you can't do it again? We're dealing in a case where one intentionally failed to recite the prayer. Only then he has no remedy. However, one who failed to pray due to error can compensate for the missed prayer by reciting the next prayer twice. Rav Ashi said the language of the brisa is also precise as it teaches omitted and did not teach erred. This indicates that the halacha is different in the case of error, and the Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from this. Page 26b. Well done. We have finished 26a. So now is Zalman's question. Let's say it's Shabbos afternoon. Let's see how the Gemara is going to read it. On a similar note, the sages taught in a brisa one who erred and did not recite the afternoon prayer on the eve of Shabbat. Right? On Friday afternoon, you didn't say the afternoon prayers. So now he prays in the evening two Amidah prayers on Shabbat evening. Also, one who erred and did not recite the afternoon prayer on Shabbat recites two weekday Amidah prayers in the evening prayer at the conclusion of Shabbat. So he would make he answers the question instead of just asking it. The question is, which prayer do you pray? Do you pray the Shabbos prayers, which are different from the weekday prayers? So now it's Friday night. You missed the weekday prayer. You missed the weekday prayer. And now it's Shabbos. So which prayer do you make? The answer is you make twice of the current prayer, which ends up being very funny. Because in Rosh Chodesh, on the new month, which we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago in session, on the new month, the difference between the prayer of a regular weekday and the davening in the new month is that you add a special paragraph asking for prayers about the new month. So what happens if in the new month in the afternoon he forgot that it was Rosh Chodesh and he prayed a regular weekday prayer and he omitted that paragraph? So it's considered as though he hasn't prayed and he needs to pray again. He needs to pray two evening prayers again. But in the evening, he's not going to recite that paragraph. So he ends up making, again, the same prayer that he prayed in the afternoon, he prays in the evening, but in the afternoon it didn't count, and now it does. But it ends up being a little interesting sometimes. So, a little bit of background over here. Is anyone here familiar with Havdalah?
I've heard the name word.
You heard the word. Okay. So, what about Kiddush? Are we familiar with the word Kiddush?
Worth.
Okay. So the we're gonna learn later that the same way how we may have to make Kiddush to sanctify Shabbos as it comes in, we also say a goodbye prayer over a cup of wine when Shabbos goes out. And we also say a special prayer called Havdalah, which is the prayer of distinction, distincting between, is that a word? Marking the distinction between the sanctity of Shabbat and the profanity of, I guess profanity was a different word back then, and the mundaneness of the week. By reciting, you have graced us, etc., in the fourth blessing of the Amidah, which is who graciously grants knowledge. So we say this over a cup of wine when we get home, but we also say, or sometimes in the shul, but we also say it in the prayer. So when is he supposed to recite this prayer of marking the distinction between Shabbos and the weekdays? So that's going to lead us to a broader discussion, which is when you're praying twice, which prayer is the prayer for now and which prayer is the makeup prayer? You might think that first you make the makeup prayer and then you make the new prayer. But the answer is no. First you make the prayer for now and afterwards you make the makeup prayer. So this blessing should be made in the first prayer as it is the actual evening prayer. But he does not recite Havdalah in the second prayer, which is in place of the afternoon prayer because he already said it. Moreover, yeah.
So do you say the Havdalah on Shabbat as Shabbat ends, or do you wait until it ends and say it the next day?
It's a good question. In theory, you could say it a little bit before Shabbos finishes. In practice, we daven the evening prayers after Shabbos is already over. And when we make Havdalah on the cup of wine, we also add a candle that we make a blessing, thanking God for fire, and that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So we do the whole ceremony after Shabbos finishes. But in pressing need, you could make it a little bit before Shabbos ends.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Moreover, if you recited Havdalah in the second prayer and did not recite Havdalah in the first prayer, the second prayer fulfills his obligation, and the first one does not fulfill his obligation. The first Amidah that he made, the first Shemona Esrei, does not count. The Gemara asks, is that to say that since he did not recite Havdalah in the first prayer, he is as one who did not pray, and we require him to return to the beginning of prayer and repeat it? In which case, we would conclude that one who fails to recite Havdalah in the prayer must repeat the prayer. But that's not true, because the Gemara raises a contradiction to the above conclusion from the Tosefta. One who erred and did not mention the might of the rains, saying he makes the wind blow and rain to fall in the second blessing of the Amidah, which is called the blessing about the revival of the dead. And one who erred and failed to request the rain in the ninth blessing of the Amidah, which is the blessing of the years, we require him to return to the beginning of prayer and repeat his prayer. However, one who erred and failed to recite Havdalah in the blessing who graciously grants knowledge, we do not require him to return to the beginning of prayer and repeat it, because he can recite the Havdalah over a cup of wine independent of his prayer. This contradiction was not resolved and remains difficult. Anyone have an answer? There's a way to answer this, which might not be the correct way, because apparently if the sages of the Talmud couldn't figure it out, so it must be an issue with it. But if you have to first make your prayer for now, and then afterwards make your makeup prayer, so your prayer for now has to include the Havdalah. If you're making first the prayer without the Havdalah and your second prayer is with the Havdalah, you're showing that you wanted your first one to be a makeup prayer for the afternoon prayer that you've missed, and your second prayer to be a prayer for now. However, that doesn't work. You have to first pray the now prayer. So by showing that you intended your first prayer to not be for the evening prayer, it doesn't count for the evening prayer. And because it has to be, the makeup prayer has to be after the evening prayer, it doesn't count for that as well. Okay. The dispute between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the times beyond which the different prayers may not be recited is rooted in a profound disagreement, also manifest in a later Amoraic dispute. The Amoraim, again, were the sages in the times of the Talmud, as opposed to the Tanoim, the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda, who were in the time of the Mishnah, which came before the Talmud. It was stated, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, the practice of praying 3 times daily is ancient, albeit not in its present form. Prayers were instituted by the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob instituted the prayers. However, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that the prayers were instituted based on the daily offerings in the Holy Temple. And the prayers parallel the offerings in terms of both the time and the characteristics. So the question is, what's the history of prayer? When and where did we begin praying? Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says, this starts all the way back to the first Jew, Abraham. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, very nice that he may have prayed, but the reason why we pray today is because of the daily offerings in the Holy Temple. Okay, so now let's bring some proof for both of these opinions. The Gemara comments, it was taught in a brisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, and we also have a brisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The Gemara elaborates. What are these two brisas? It was taught in a brisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina. Abraham instituted the morning prayer, as it is stated. When Abraham came to look out over Sodom, the day after he prayed on its behalf. It says, Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And from context, as well as the language utilized in the verse, The verb standing over here means nothing other than prayer, as this is the language used to describe Pinchas's prayer after the plague, as it is stated, and Pinchas stood up and prayed, and the plague ended. So clearly, Abraham was accustomed to stand in prayer in the morning. So we see Abraham prayed in the morning. Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer, as it is written. Isaac went out to converse in the field toward evening. And conversation means nothing other than prayer. As it is stated, a prayer of the afflicted when he is faint and pours out his complaint before the Lord, which is a word in Hebrew that's similar to the converse and conversation, conversate. So Isaac was the first to pray as evening approached, which is the afternoon prayer. And Jacob instituted the evening prayer, as it is stated, and he encountered the place and he slept there, for the sun had set. The word encounter means nothing other than prayer, as it is stated when God spoke to Jeremiah, and you do not pray on behalf of this nation, and do not raise on their behalf song and prayer, and do not encounter me, for I do not hear you. So Jacob prayed in the evening after the sun had set. They say in a joking manner, they say, why did Jacob, of all of them, why was it Jacob who established the evening prayer? Just think about what the house looked like. If you had 12 little kids running around, you would also run to synagogue. Bedtime, right? So now we have Abraham prayed the morning prayer, Isaac prayed the afternoon prayer, and Jacob prayed the evening prayer. And it was taught in a brayso in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that the laws of prayer are based on the laws of daily offerings. Why did the rabbi say that the morning prayer may be recited until noon? Is because although the daily morning offering is typically brought early in the morning, it may be sacrificed until noon. And Rabbi Yehuda says, my opinion, that the morning prayer may be recited until 4 hours into the day is because the daily morning offering can only be sacrificed until 4 hours. And why did the rabbi say that the afternoon prayer may be recited until the evening? Because the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed until the evening. And Rabbi Yehuda says the afternoon prayer may be recited only until the midpoint of the afternoon, because according to his opinion, the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed only until the midpoint of the afternoon. And why did they say the evening prayer is not fixed? Because what would they sacrifice in the evening? There were no sacrifices, but any extra limbs or fats that did not have time to burn during the day, they would offer at night, because the burnings of the limbs and fats of the offerings that were not consumed by fire on the altar until the evening remained on the altar and were offered continuously throughout the entire night. And why did the rabbi say that the additional prayer may be recited all day? Because the additional offering that is brought throughout the entire day. However, Rabbi Yehuda says that the additional prayer may be recited until the 7th hour of the day, because the additional offering is sacrificed until the 7th hour, which is interesting. According to the first brayso, that the prayers were established by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who established the additional prayer. The brayso continues and states there are 2 times for the afternoon prayer: the earlier mincha, and the lesser, later mincha. The Gemara clarifies the difference between them, which is mincha gedola, from 6.5 hours after sunrise and on, which is a half hour after noon and on. That is the earliest time that the daily afternoon offering may be sacrificed, as in the case of the eve of Passover that occurs on Shabbat. When is mincha katana is from 9.5 hours and on. That is the standard time that the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed, which is 3.5 hours after midday. So now that we have 2 times of mincha, when Rabbi Yehuda said that you could pray until halfway through mincha, are we talking about the mincha that begins a half hour afternoon, or the mincha that begins 3.5 hours afternoon? On that note, a dilemma was raised before them. Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that the afternoon prayer may be recited only until the midpoint of the afternoon, does he say the midpoint of the first mincha? When would that be? If you have a half hour from noon all the way until nighttime. So that would be 5.5 hours. Who wants to split 5.5 hours with me? You have two and a half.
Two,
What?
2.75.
Right. So that's what, 2 hours and 45 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes after half an hour afternoon. It'll be 3 hours and 15 minutes afternoon, right?
Oh.
So you have 3 hours and 15 minutes after midday to say Shema. So from a half hour after midday until 3 hours and 45 minutes and 15 minutes after midday. What happens if we talk about 9.5 hours into the day? So 3.5 hours after midday gives us 2.5 hours until night. What's half of 2.5 hours is 1 hour and 15 minutes. 1 hour and 15 minutes plus 3.5 would be 4 hours and 45 minutes after midday. So we had either 3 hours and 15 minutes after midday or 4 hours and 45 minutes after midday. So the question is, which one did he mean? Right? So let's read that paragraph again. On that note, a dilemma was raised before them. Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that the afternoon prayer may be recited only until the midpoint of the afternoon, does he say midpoint of the first mincha, the mincha gedola, or does he say the midpoint of the last mincha? Come and hear an explicit resolution to this dilemma, as it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda said, they said the midpoint of the last mincha, which is 11 hours minus a quarter of an hour after sunrise. That means 10 hours and 45 minutes after sunrise, which we got it right, because 6 hours plus 4 hours and 45 minutes gives us 10 hours. So 6 hours of the morning, 4 hours and 45 minutes of the afternoon gives us 10 hours and 45 minutes from sunrise, which is an hour and a quarter before sunset.
What happens if you live in Alaska in the
That's a
winter?
good question, actually. It's a very good question. So we're going to finish with this. If you live in Alaska, then you have a problem.
Or for that matter, in St. Petersburg.
So in St. Petersburg, it's easier because every day there's a little bit of evening time. But sometimes, so we're going to
Yeah, but
learn
only a
later.
few hours.
Right. But at least you have a few hours. When you have in the North Pole, sometimes it could go for months where the sun doesn't go down. So there you really have a big question. But if you live in a place where the sun does go down every day, at least for a little bit, so then the way that the Jewish hours work is we take the entire daytime and split it into 12. We take the entire nighttime and split it into 12. So your hour, your Jewish hour in St. Petersburg in middle of the summer is going to be probably close to 2 hours, an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, somewhere around there. Here in Florida, I think it fluctuates between about 50 minutes and 70 minutes, somewhere around there. Two announcements. Number one, please check your emails. This Friday night, we are going to be having a beautiful community Shabbat dinner commemorating the day that the Lubavitcher Rebbe became Rebbe and how Chabad became what Chabad is, the man behind it all. That's going to be this week, Friday night, and of course, good food and good company. And tomorrow, 11 a.m. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Where's my title for this week? Oh, I like this. The People's Torah. Is Torah study only for those able to dedicate their lives to it? How regular people can make Torah study a part of their lives. So you guys are already doing that. And let's see what this week has to bring. Wishing you all a wonderful day, a happy day. I hope to see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. and Friday night at, I forget exactly what time. I think it's about 5